You're listening to English Go Podcast. We'll get started right after this. This episode is probably going to be the final episode in my response to Daichi's email with his questions about learning English. I have to say I really enjoyed the last episode because I think it's actually the first time I've talked about the sort of English personality that you develop. And after recording it, I thought that this is a really important point that gets looked over, that gets forgotten so often. And it's I don't really hear anyone talking about it. So I'm glad that I got to talk about that. If you have not heard the last episode, please go back and listen to it because it's a good thing to bear in mind when you're learning English. Anyway, today we are moving on to another question about grammar. Daichi wants to know if I can talk a little about my impression from studying Japanese grammar, because the order of words are the complete opposite. Okay, so when I first started learning Japanese, I think like many people learning a language, you buy a textbook, and that has lots of grammar points in there. And I remember looking at the grammar points, and I remember thinking, oh wow, all of these grammar points make so much sense. They're very logical, and Japanese must be a very logical language. So what does that mean? I guess it means like maths. If you apply this rule, then you get this answer. There's a right way to do something, there's a wrong way to do something. You'll either get a correct answer or a wrong answer. That's what I thought in the beginning when I knew very little Japanese. I quickly learned that this is not true. Japanese is not logical language. Some things are logical, but like every language out there, it's very much illogical. There's lots of things that don't make sense. There are lots of rules that apply to some things, but the rules don't apply to everything. So in summary, it's a bit of a mess. And English is exactly the same. English is a bit of a mess, really. It's not perfect. The rules that you learn don't always apply. And some things are so hard to put into rules that it's almost impossible to do it anyway. So a good example of how bad English is, or how bad languages are, and how different they are to things like maths, where you've got like a right answer, a wrong answer. If you've ever tried to use computer translation, if you've ever tried to translate a sentence from one language to another, and you've seen all the mistakes that get made, have you ever asked yourself, why? Why am I seeing so many mistakes? Why can't the computer translate a language? And that's because you can't speak a language by learning grammar rules. I know it sounds crazy. I know that all of the books and all of the schools tell you how important it is learning grammar, and you learn grammar and then you can learn a language and all that kind of stuff. But it simply isn't true. If you feed all of the grammar rules about a language into a computer, then that computer still can't translate. It still can't translate from one language to another. It still can't understand the language. It still can't understand the grammar. It's no good. It won't work. And that's exactly what will happen to you. If you learn nothing but grammar rules, then you will become like a computer translating software. And you'll come up with some very, very strange, very, very strange translations. So I started studying grammar. Well, not really. I started sort of like learning about grammar with that in mind. I started learning thinking like, yeah, grammar's useful, but it's not really learning language. Learning grammar happens when you're listening, when you're reading, and that the stuff that you learn in a book, you're studying grammar, that's just giving you tips. That's just giving you a hint. It's like it lets you know that the sentences might be in this order, or it lets you know that here's a way of saying something. But I think I've never actually tried to study grammar like some people do, like where they're like, oh, I've got to learn this rule. And maybe they write it down, and maybe they try to make example sentences with it and that kind of stuff. I've never thought that grammar was that important, because when I learned the language, when I learned English, I didn't study grammar. When you learned your own language, you didn't study grammar. You just picked it up. You just heard everyone speaking it, and your brain just started copying it. And that's the important thing, because it's not maths. It really isn't maths. You can't just apply some rules and come up with some perfect sentence. That's why computers can't do it. It's sort of like, it's a type of logic that's called fuzzy logic. It's not pure logic like we get in maths. It's lots of patterns, lots and lots of patterns, and your brain is very good at spotting patterns and learning patterns. So what happens is, when you're growing up, when you're learning to speak your first language, you just hear the same thing over and over again. You start to make sense of the noises, of the sounds, and then you start to pick up words, and then you start to notice that some words are connected together, and then you learn more and more, and then you just start copying people. You learn how to say, like, I want a drink, and then you learn how to say, I want a drink of orange juice, and then I want a drink of orange juice because I am hot, or because I am thirsty. You just learn that there are certain patterns, there are certain ways of saying things, and you don't even think about them as being grammar. It's just speaking. It's just speaking your own language. Or just speaking English. This is how I try to learn Japanese. And sometimes, occasionally, I go back and I look at grammar. I don't know why. I guess sometimes I think, maybe I should have studied grammar a bit more. And when I'm doing this, sometimes I look at this grammar point and I already know it. I've never studied it before. I've just learnt it because I've been reading, or because I've been listening to listening to Japanese. And I think, that's a grammar point? Really? Is it? I just thought it was a word. I didn't know this was grammar. I think that's a really good place to be. When you're learning grammar, you don't even know you're learning it. So one thing I would say about grammar, it's, if you enjoy learning it, I don't, I find it a bit boring just studying grammar only, but if you enjoy just reading through grammar books, carry on doing that, great. It's not going to hurt you, unless that's all you do to study English. If you just study grammar, yeah, okay, that will hurt you. But if you enjoy it, carry on doing it. If you're studying for an English test, then yes, you're probably going to have to study grammar and grammar rules, because English tests, language tests are all stupid, and they work in a stupid way because somebody wants to give you a score and somebody wants to mark a piece of paper. It just makes no sense to me. Language is a way that we communicate with each other. It's mostly a spoken thing. It exists so we can communicate with our voices, to other people, not so we can communicate with like a pen and paper or a computer or something. So language tests, they shouldn't have any writing in. They probably don't even need any reading. If I wanted to know how good someone's English was, I would have a chat with them. I'd have a conversation. And in about, the first few minutes, I would get some idea of how good their English was. And then I could ask them about some topics, and depending on their answers, I'd be able to tell how good their English was. Why do we need exams? Why do we need scores? Why do we need pieces of paper with tests on? We don't, but that's how the academic world works. Anyway, that is a completely separate topic, and one I feel quite strongly about, but I should resist the temptation, resist the urge to talk about it more here. So, a quick summary. That's sort of my viewpoint on studying Japanese grammar. I never really tried to compare it much to English. Sometimes I was reading something and I thought, oh, that's interesting. In English, we do it this way. But I think, yes, maybe when I started learning, I was like, why does this happen? Why do you do this? Why does it work this way? Why do you say things backwards? Why don't we use pronouns in Japanese so much? And all these kind of things, all these questions I had. But at some point, I just stopped asking those questions. And this is just a language. You just have to learn how to say what it is you want to say. You don't have to worry about why it works that way. You don't have to worry about the rules surrounding that, like what rules I have to use to say this in this situation and all stuff. I think when I started listening, really started listening to Japanese, like every single day, that's when I noticed my speaking was becoming better. That's when I noticed my sort of Japanese personality was starting to develop. That's when I noticed I'd really stopped caring about grammar. I'd stopped thinking about grammar rules and stuff, and just asked my brain, like, does this feel right? When I say this, it feels a bit wrong. I think it might be wrong. Or, oh no, this feels right. This feels natural. I'll just say it without thinking it. Maybe it's not. I don't know. And then whoever I'm speaking to, hopefully they can correct me. But, I guess that is it. I think I've said everything I wanted to say, so I do hope that has answered all of your questions, Daichi. And if you have any more, then yes, get in touch with me again, and perhaps I can make another episode if you found this one useful. I do hope that everyone has enjoyed it, and I wish everyone very good luck in your English studies. Until next time, bye-bye. Thank you for listening to English Go Podcast. If you'd like to listen ad-free, listen to extra bonus episodes, or read the transcripts of these episodes, then please consider supporting this podcast at patreon.com/EnglishGo. Thank you.